Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Amazon Linux 2 Deep Dive webinar. My name is Kylie DiMartini. I'm the Global Product Lead for our Service Validation programs, including both our AWS Service Ready program and AWS Service Delivery program. Today, we'll be focused on the latest version of the AWS optimized Linux distribution, Amazon Linux 2. This session will provide you with an overview and deeper dive of Amazon Linux 2, including its product capabilities, features, and the benefits of this service. We're also pleased to share with you today a demonstration of how Amazon Linux 2 is integrated into AWS to help you maximize your cloud offerings. Finally, we'll cover the AWS Service Ready program and how you can benefit from achieving the Amazon Linux 2 designation. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to Thomas Cameron, our Senior Partner Solutions Architect for Amazon Linux 2.
Thank you very much, Kylie. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your attending today. I know that everybody's super busy, and carving an hour out of your day is definitely something that we appreciate. So we're glad you're here. Today, what we're going to be talking about is, or the agenda, I should say, is we'll do some brief introductions. I'll talk a little bit about the Amazon Linux 2 Ready program. We'll dive into a technical overview and integration with other AWS services as regards Amazon Linux 2. I'll talk a little bit about kernel live patching, and then I'll show you a brief demo of how AWS services are accessed and how Amazon Linux 2 is integrated into those services. And then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end. So as far as introductions go, first, I want to introduce Serena Chung. She's the brains of the operation. I like to joke and say that she is little, but then so is dynamite. She is the Senior Partner Development Manager. Her email is on the screen, and she's going to be your primary point of contact as partners if you have any questions or want to join the Amazon Linux 2 Ready program or need anything from AWS around Amazon Linux 2. I, as Kylie mentioned, am Thomas Cameron. I like to joke that I'm the muscle, so I'm strong but not too bright. I'm a Senior Partner Solutions Architect, and I'm actually in the process of transitioning over to a senior technical trainer role. So you're going to definitely want to reach out to Serena if you have any questions. And then, of course, is Kylie. Kylie is the fixer. She makes sure that everything happens when, where, and how it's supposed to. She's an APN product manager. She's going to be the one who really makes sure that everything is marshaled into position to make sure that your products and services are properly represented in APN. So together, our goal in life is really just to make your life as easy as possible. We want to make it as easy and valuable as possible for partners to certify with Amazon Linux 2. So let's talk about what that looks like. The Amazon Linux 2 Ready program is the program that we have set up to enable our partners to have any products or services that run on Amazon Linux or any version of Linux to be certified on Amazon Linux 2. And Amazon Linux 2, as it says on the screen, is a secure, stable, and high-performance Linux environment for cloud and enterprise applications. Amazon Linux 2 is designed to be secure and stable and run quickly and integrate tightly with AWS. It gives customers an application environment that has both long-term support, but also access to the latest innovations in the Linux ecosystem. And as a bonus, Amazon Linux 2 is provided at no additional charge, so you don't have that uplift for an enterprise Linux distribution like you do from other vendors. Amazon Linux is the fastest growing operating system in AWS. About 98% of the largest 200 AWS customers use Amazon Linux 2 in some form or fashion. We work with our customers and we hear from them that they really love Amazon Linux because it's a single vendor to contact. It's AWS for the operating system, AWS for storage, AWS for networking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's no support costs. There's no additional support costs associated with that. And that tight integration with those AWS services. And then the reliability and performance on EC2. Customers prefer to run ISV applications on Amazon Linux 2 so they don't have to manage all of these different environments. So the thing to remember about Amazon Linux 2 is that it's the second iteration. It is our long-term support version of Amazon Linux because we had so many customers who, while they loved having the latest and greatest versions of development languages and runtimes and things like that, they wanted to have a version of Linux that could be used with enterprise applications. So that's really where we're going with Amazon Linux 2 and beyond. Now, the software that we're talking about for ISV use cases is, I mean, it's all over the map. If you think about it, think of all the things that can be run on Linux. Utilities for log file aggregation and analysis, fault management, databases, data visualization, antivirus gateways, intrusion detection, data warehousing, and all sorts of other enterprise applications and agents and things like that. So the use cases are really limited only by the imagination. And these are just a small portion of the partners that we have who are Amazon Linux 2 ready. I'm not going to read off the eye chart, but you can see there are names on there that are everyday household names in the IT industry. Now, the target partner profile is really any enterprise application that runs on or integrates with Linux. We don't really recommend SaaS products because that's generally not going to be something that our joint customers are going to be running software on. But if you have a SaaS offering that has, say, agents that run on Linux, that certainly makes sense. And some of the benefits for Amazon Linux 2 ready partners include being listed on the Amazon Linux 2 website prominently, promoted on the AWS Partner Network blog and cross-posted on social media, promoted in the AWS Partner Solutions Finder and internally to AWS sales and relevant service teams, invitations to exclusive NDA roadmap events and access to pre-release kernels, direct access to dedicated Amazon Linux 2 technical staff for technical inquiries, and $500 AWS credit for validated products. So we want to make sure that you don't incur any costs to do the certification validation. So we'll give you credit to make sure that that's as smooth as possible. So let's talk a little bit about the technical overview. As I mentioned earlier, our customers asked us for a Linux distribution, which adopted updates and improvements and changes really, really quickly. And that's where the original version of Amazon Linux back in 2011 came from. We took a common upstream from, say, CentOS 5 or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5, but then we put a newer kernel, newer glibc, newer all kinds of stuff to make it a much faster moving distribution, and customers loved it. Amazon Linux 2 is the next generation of that, and it is a purpose-built Linux distribution. It's designed for Amazon Web Services, provides a 5-year life cycle and long-term support, but it still provides all of the latest AWS drivers and utilities and other cool technical goodies. There are several categories of improvements to the distribution that you need to understand to see what we've done with Amazon Linux 2. The kernel, various applications, containerization, the Corretto JVM, extras. I'll talk a little bit about security, and then, as I mentioned earlier, the integration with other AWS services. So the Amazon Linux 2 kernel is purpose-built for secure high-performance computing. It's really designed for the AWS environment or for virtualized environments. It's based on the 4.14 kernel, and the 4.19 kernel is available as an extra. And in fact, we just recently dropped the 5.40 kernel. So we've got the latest and greatest kernel that's out there. You can get access to those latest kernels through the Amazon Linux Extras program, which I'll talk about more later in the presentation. Amazon Linux 2 gained significant benefits by upgrading to the 4.14 kernel. Originally, at the time it was released, it was the 3.10 kernel. So going from 3.10 to 4.14 was a big jump. And then the Amazon Linux kernel team made 4.14 even better. So the kernel is optimized for AWS, and by that I mean we have included kernel support for things like the Elastic Network Adapter, or ENA, Elastic Block Storage, Elastic Fabric Adapter, Lustre, the hibernation capability, so you can actually hibernate rather than shutting down or terminating instances. The goal here is to decrease time to production when you're deploying new instances. So when you fire up a new Amazon Linux 2 instance, from the time that you fire it up to the time that you can be productive is as minimal as possible because you're not having to install all of this stuff. It also makes updates much easier. You don't have to reapply drivers after a kernel update because we include those drivers with the AL2 kernel. The Amazon Linux kernel, as I mentioned earlier, is optimized for AWS. The Amazon Linux team collaborates with the various AWS service teams, so networking and storage and database and so on. making sure that their drivers are available immediately. As soon as they release a driver, it goes into the Amazon Linux 2 distribution. We also strip out those components of the kernel that don't need to be there for the AWS EC2 compute environment or a virtualized environment. So that reduces the surface area for attacks as a side benefit. Fewer services running, fewer drivers loaded, things like that means that there are less opportunities for bad guys to do bad things to your systems. We've also tuned and or patched existing kernel components to make sure that storage, network adapters, and so on perform optimally on AL2, or on AWS, I should say. As I mentioned earlier, we have the Lustre driver, the latest Lustre driver, hibernation capabilities, ENA v2, EFA, and so on. So if you fire up a current version of the Amazon Linux 2 AMI, all of those technologies are already baked into the image. We also include a newer version of glibc and the compiler toolchain. So we're at 7.3.1 on the compiler toolchain and 2.2.6 on glibc. And what that enables us to do is when we compile the binaries for the system, they are compiled with a more highly optimized GCC and a better compiler, so they run faster. We've also backported features from newer versions of glibc where appropriate. For instance, the 2.28 glibc version had some some bug fixes that we backported to our version of 2.26. So even though it says 2.26, don't think that there are no innovations from any newer versions in there. Now, we are committed to open source, and we are committed to the upstream kernel and upstream Linux communities. We strive to contribute all of our kernel code back to the upstream kernel, and we also share that code with the public and all of our Linux partners. So Red Hat's RHEL and CentOS and Fedora, SUSE's SLES, Canonical's Ubuntu, and the greater Linux community all have access to those patches. We make them available as quickly as we can. We've also included capabilities around containerization in Amazon Linux 2. We have the container optimized minimal Amazon Linux 2 distribution, and we also have Bottle Rocket. Sorry, we have too many fireworks as code names. But we have Bottle Rocket, which is loosely based on Amazon Linux 2, which is a container optimized distribution. My point here is we have done a ton of work both with upstream communities and internally to make sure that Amazon Linux and its derivatives are optimized for containerization. So Amazon Elastic Container Service, or ECS, and Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, or EKS. We have optimized AMIs based on Amazon Linux 2 for those environments. They're slimmed down versions with ECS and EKS agents included. Docker is built in. We even offer a container base image for any Docker-based environments. So we are all in with containerization, and we're doing a lot of really exciting work there with Amazon Linux 2 and derivatives. We also have an OpenJDK distribution called Corretto that includes no-cost long-term support. Corretto is an OpenJDK distribution from AWS. It's no-cost, multi-platform, so you can use it on Linux, you can use it on Windows, you can use it on Mac OS. It's a production-ready distribution of the OpenJava Development Kit, or OpenJDK. It comes with long-term support that will include performance enhancements and security fixes. We run Corretto internally on thousands and thousands of production services, and Corretto is certified as compatible with the Java SE standard. So with Corretto, you can develop and run your Java apps anywhere, either internally in your enterprise or on AWS EC2. Some of the benefits of Corretto include that it is backed by Amazon. It is production ready, so you're not having to worry about is this ready for prime time. We use it, as I said, on thousands of services. We do offer multi-platform support, and there's no cost associated with Corretto. We also offer long-term support with Corretto as well. So you know that you can be safe using this as your JDK in the AWS environment. Now, you heard me mention earlier Amazon Linux Extras. We don't limit you to just the operating system. AWS provides multiple extra software repositories. Those repositories contain versions of popular software that our customers have asked for. Things like Ruby, Docker, Postgres, multiple versions of PHP, Tomcat, extra packages for enterprise Linux, the Corretto JVM, I mean, new kernels, like I said, 5.4.0 is out, Nginx, desktop environments, Office versions for LibreOffice and ImageMagick, many, many more. There are a ton of extra repositories available for Amazon Linux too, and that provides a whole lot of flexibility. And you know that because those extra repositories are built and maintained by AWS, that it's going to work with Amazon Linux too. Enabling these repositories and installing the packages is super, super easy. It's literally just the Amazon Linux extras command, and you can do list, enable, install, or even yum install. And I'll show you what that looks like. If you want to list the extra repositories that are available, you just run the command Amazon Linux extras list, and you'll see that there are, you can see on the screen, memcached, Postgres, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Tons of distributions available, or I mean, not distributions, but repositories, I should say. And you can see that there are some light blue repositories. That just means that those are enabled. So you can see that I've got EPEL and I've got Docker enabled, but I don't have, for instance, testing or Corretto 8. To enable an extra repository without installing any software, it's fairly straightforward. You do Amazon Linux extras, enable, and then the name of the repository. And when you do that, you'll see, as you see on my screen, that repository will turn light blue, and you can see that it's enabled. Then you can install the package by cleaning up the yum metadata, as you see at the bottom of the screen right there, yum clean metadata, and then yum install whatever the package name is. If you want to see what that looks like, I've done a real quick screenshot. You can see that I did sudo yum clean metadata and then sudo yum install vim enhanced and vim minimal, and you get a software installation, just like you would be used to from any Linux distribution. And that's what that looks like when it completes. Now, I'm lazy. I would rather just do everything with one command instead of enabling it and then installing. And the way that you do that is you can do Amazon Linux extras, install Vim, and it'll do everything all at once. It'll enable the distribution, it'll install the software package, and boom, we're good to go. And the cool thing about this is there is no complicated licensing processing. There's no cumbersome subscription management process. There's no cryptic gymnastics where you get extraneous repositories and have to disable them all. You just enable it and install and go to town. And it's compatible with third-party repositories. So for instance, if you want to use extra packages for enterprise Linux, it works with AL2, and it can even be enabled using Amazon Linux extras. So it's really, really straightforward. The packages in the extras repositories are not covered under the AL2 long-term support policy. And by that, I mean only the latest packages in a channel are supported. So if you want to install package, whatever version 1.0.1, that will be supported until 1.0.2 comes out. Once 1.0.2 comes out, if you have an issue, our support folks will just ask you to update to the latest version. That's all that means. You still get long-term support, but we don't give long-term support for older versions of packages. I do also want to make sure that you understand that compatible does not necessarily equal certified. Compatible should be interpreted as generally known to work, but with no guarantee on a package-by-package basis. So, if you're using EPEL, for instance, the extra packages for enterprise Linux, if something comes up, we will absolutely help you with it. It's not that it's not supported. It's just that we don't offer the same level of certification that we do for extras as we do for the core operating system. Amazon Linux 2 inherits open source security and then builds on it. And let me explain what that means. The upstream Linux kernel is already super, super secure. It gives you a lot of really cool services and models, including memory address randomization, so a hacker can't attack a well-known address for a process, strict process separation with kernel control groups, discretionary access control via users, groups, permissions, and so on, mandatory access control via, optionally, security enhanced Linux, firewalling with IP tables and EV tables, crypto support, advanced auditing, and both local and remote logging. So there's a ton of security that's just built into the distribution right out of the gate. But then we, as I mentioned earlier, we tune the kernel to make it as lightweight as possible, no extra drivers and no services running, to minimize that surface area of attack. So we try to keep bad guys out of your systems every way possible. Now, open source communities are well known as responding very, very quickly to problems. There's a famous quote from Linus Torvalds that says, "Given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow." And so the open source community in general is really good and really fast at doing updates. We respond really quickly to published vulnerabilities and release patches quickly as well. You can look at the Amazon Linux Security Center at alas.aws.amazon.com, and that is the place to go to see all security notices and fixes for AL2. And this is what that website looks like. So you can take a peek at what versions of software, what security vulnerabilities have been exposed, and what packages we have available to mitigate those risks. Now, you've heard me say this a number of times, and I want to dive a little bit more deeply into it. Amazon Linux 2 is integrated with the rest of AWS. It's really designed to work with other AWS services. There are a bunch of utilities for integration with those services, from a whole bunch of different packages, including things like the Bootstrapper for CloudFormation, the AWS CLI utilities, the API tools for doing API management, the AWS logs and fence agents, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Tools for managing elastic load balancers and EC2 instances and things like that. All of those are available as separate software packages on Amazon Linux 2. And then we also include the AWS CLI package that I want to dive a little bit more deeply into. The AWS CLI package contains apps to manage over 175 services from the command line, and it's just included in the AMI. This greatly simplifies deployment. The nice thing is you launch the AMI and you can start working, and you know that you've got the latest version of these utilities just right out of the gate. You don't have to do any integration yourself. You don't have to go enable any repositories. It's just there and it just works. And this eye chart, sorry, this is a huge table, but I wanted to put this up there to show you that these are all of the services that can be managed and configured from the command line or programmatically via APIs from an Amazon Linux 2 instance. So everything from the kind of standard stuff like CloudWatch and CloudTrail and RDS and Redshift and things like that to even things like Alexa for Business and Elasticache and identity and access management and so on and so forth. So there's a ton of capabilities that are just baked into the AMI for you to integrate with other AWS services. We also integrate the latest versions of device drivers into the kernel for those services which require drivers. So anything that has to do with block devices or network devices or anything like that, those are integrated straight into the kernel. The command line tools, as I mentioned earlier, are included with the operating system. With the inclusion of those AWS packages, AWS-* packages, you can start managing and interacting with 175 services at the first boot. Now, there's another cool bit of technology that is available with Amazon Linux 2, which is called live kernel patching. This is rebootless patching. So how patching works, how live patching works, first a caveat, and that is that the version of live patching that we use does depend on the 4.0 and newer kernels. But what happens is the kernel ftrace capabilities enable kpatch to trace function calls while the kernel is running. Those trace points enable the kernel scheduler, interrupt manager, memory manager, power manager, virtual file system layer, virtualization, and so on to be traced and managed. What that allows us to do is we can stop and alter those kernel functions at those trace points so that we can basically pull out the running kernel and plug in the updated kernel with whatever security updates, and then get those processes to start running again so that you don't have to reboot, and whatever was running before, whatever system calls were running before, just start running in the new kernel environment. It's really, really cool. It's a great way to do a kernel update in a production environment without having to take any outages. Kpatch stops all those kernel processes. It ensures that the patches are applied atomically. That is, the entire patch succeeds or it fails and is not applied at all. And it also ensures that none of the processes it stops are using the functions that are being patched. So there's a lot of logic built into it. And this does give you the ability to patch a running kernel with no downtime. Now, we release two types of kernel live patches. The first one is security updates. So these are updates for Linux CVEs, or common vulnerability and exposures. These updates are typically rated as important or critical using the Amazon Linux Security Advisory ratings. Again, you can go and look at alas.aws.amazon.com to see those. They generally map to a CVE scoring system or a CV scoring system score of 7 or higher. Now, in some cases, we may actually release updates or patches, kernel patches, before a CVE is assigned. In those cases, the patches will appear as bug fixes. And that brings me to the second type of kernel live patch that we produce, which is kernel bug fixes. These are fixes for critical bugs and stability issues that are not necessarily associated with CVEs. We provide kernel live patches for an Amazon Linux 2 kernel version for up to 3 months after it's released. Now, that's really important to understand. After that 3-month period, you really do need to update to a later kernel version to continue to receive kernel live patches. You can apply multiple live patches, but the oldest one can't be more than 3 months old. Then you're going to really have to reboot the system so you instantiate a new kernel. These live patches are made available as signed RPM packages in the existing Amazon Linux 2 repositories. The patches can be installed using plain old existing Yum workflows. We've tried to make it as easy as possible to use kernel live patching. Kernel live patching is provided at no additional cost. That is a differentiator that you can talk to customers about. We do kernel live patching for free. That is not the case with some other enterprise Linux distros. As I said, it is supported on Amazon EC2 instances, but be aware that it's also on-premise instances, virtual machines running Amazon Linux 2 on, for instance, VMware or Hyper-V or KVM or whatever. To use kernel live patching, you have to have a 64-bit architecture that is supported by Amazon Linux 2, so that's x86, 64, and you got to have Amazon Linux 2 with the kernel version at the bottom of your screen, 4.14.165-131.185 or later. So let's break out of the slide deck and let's do a little bit of a demo. So what I've done is I've got an instance that's running right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of the things that you can do with the command line to see, to manage instances and so on and so forth. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that right now I've got this one instance, this Amazon Linux 2 integration demo instance that is the one that I'm logged into right now. It's running. And what I'm going to do is I am going to run some additional instances. And let me show you what that looks like. Let me clear the screen. And let me go over what I'm doing here. I'm using the AWS CLI tool. So I'm going to do AWS. The service is EC2. And I'm going to say run instances. I want to use this AMI, which is the same AMI that I'm running right now. So that's image ID is AMI, blah, 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 blah. And you can see the image AMI right down here. That string right there is where I got that from. So that's where I got the image, the AMI from. -- count is how many of them you want to run. Instance type is what size you want to run it. Key name is what PEM key you're going to use. I generated a key name for the US West 1 region before this demo started. And security group ID, blah, 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 blah. Well, if I go into the EC2 dashboard and I look at my security groups, here are the security groups that are available, and there's the one that I'm using for this demo. So basically, what that allows me to do, let me go back over here to instances. So you can see I got one instance running. I'm going to move this down just a bit. I'm going to fire that command up. And it spits out a whole bunch of information for me. This is all of it basically enumerates what the instance that I'm firing up is going to look like. And if I refresh my screen here, hey, look at that. You can see that it's spinning up a new instance using the AMI ID and so on that I talked about. And if I click on it, I will see that it's got the security groups that are assigned to it, you know, the AL2 demo security group, it's got the right AMI type, and so on and so forth. It's in the right subnet, it's on the right VPC, and so on. Now, what I can also do is if I grab this instance ID, I can do something like, and let me clear my screen, I can do AWS EC2 create tags resources, and that's the instance that I'm doing. Oh. And then I can say the tag that I want to create, I'm going to give it a key of name and a value of instance 2. So when I run that command, notice that right now there's no name over here until I refresh. And when I refresh, you see that I have now assigned a name. My point here is not to be super complex in the commands that I'm issuing. It's really more a matter of, I just want to show you that you don't necessarily have to go through the UI to integrate with various services in AWS. You can do these from the command line. So I can also do things like describe instances. So if I come over here, get back into here, I'm going to clear the screen. Oh, so I'll do AWS EC2 describe dash instances. There we go. It'll actually go through. Now this kind of flashed by real quickly. Let me do that again, and let me pipe it to less. So you can see that the full information about each instance that I have running is available. It's got my DNS name, it's got the IP address, both public and private, what VPC it's a part of, what the DNS name is, and so on and so forth. There's a ton of information here about all of the networking and so on and so forth. So that's some information that you can get. So that's kind of cool. Now I can also do some cool things, and I'm going to change screens here. I'm going to go to the S3 screen. And if I go and I look, I've got a couple of S3 buckets that I need to keep here for logging purposes, just for internal use. But I can do some cool stuff like, let's say that I need to create an object store for an application that I'm building. I can do AWS S3 make bucket TDCam demo, and then I just create a date. So I do that, and it says that it made a bucket TDCam demo 2020-08-04. And if I come over here and refresh my screen, there's my S3 bucket. So I can, again, integrate with S3. I can integrate with EC2. I can do things like I can integrate with IAM, or I can manage IAM. So I can, let's do this. If I do AWS IAM list users output table, I can see all of the users that I've got created in my environment. I can use AWS IAM to create users, to delete users, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of neat stuff that I can do in my instance from the command line to do some really just cool stuff, get some good information, create resources within the various services, and so on. So there's a lot of stuff that can be done. Unfortunately, we're getting pretty skinny on time, but again, I can't really give you an in-depth demo of all the cool things, the cool integrations, but I can say that if I just do AWS by itself, AWS help by itself, it goes into all of these different services which are available. So definitely want to look at those, and then look at the individual services that are available as separate packages. So if I do sudo yum list AWS-star, there's a ton of tools, API tools for EC2, ELB, monitoring, and so on. So that being said, we are coming to the end. I do want to say absolutely thank you very much for being here. Please complete the webinar surveys that are sent to your inbox. And if you have any questions at all, you can learn more at the URL that's listed on the page right in front of you. And then you can definitely reach out to Serena. She is, as I said, kind of the driving force, the dynamo behind the Amazon Linux 2 program, and she can help you out with all of that. With that, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.